Hi there. Tonight, we're starting the story of why it sucked to be a medieval court jester. During the Middle Ages, court jesters were the king's entertainers, wearing bright clothes and telling jokes to make royalty laugh. But behind their colorful costumes, their lives were often lonely, risky, and full of pressure. They had to be clever and quick, balancing humor with caution to survive in a world of strict rules and changing moods. Let's travel back in time to explore the hidden struggles of these medieval jesters and the surprising roles they played in royal courts. Before we begin, you can like the video and subscribe, only if you really enjoy it. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing people from all over the world. Imagine a huge castle perched high on a hill, its thick stone walls towering against the sky like silent guardians. The castle was a fortress built to protect its inhabitants from dangers that came from outside: wild animals roaming the forests, rival lords and armies seeking to invade, and storms that whipped the countryside with cold wind and rain. Inside these walls lived the king, his family, and many others who made up the royal court. It was a world full of rules, secrets, and ceremonies, where everyone had a place and a job. Among the knights, nobles, ladies, and servants lived the court jester, a man dressed in colorful, patchwork clothes, with a hat that had 3 points, each tipped with a tiny bell. These bells jingled softly whenever he moved, announcing his presence with a gentle musical chime. His face was often painted with bright colors, sometimes with a smile stretched wide, or a sad frown, depending on the mood he wanted to show. At first glance, the jester might look like a lucky man. After all, he was the only person allowed to joke and make fun in the presence of kings and queens. He could speak words that others dared not say. He was the entertainer, the one who could bring joy to a serious, sometimes grim, royal court. But the truth was far more complicated. The life of a jester was full of challenges and dangers hidden beneath the laughter. The king's mood could change suddenly and without warning. If the king was in a good mood, the jester's jokes would be met with hearty laughter and applause. The king might even reward the jester with gifts, food, or a place at his side. But if the king was angry or displeased, the jester's jokes could backfire. One wrong word, one joke that touched a sensitive subject, or a careless look could result in punishment, or worse. The court jester had to be clever, quick, and careful. He needed to read the room, understand the king's feelings, and adjust his performance on the spot. Sometimes, the jester's humor was a mask, hiding his own fears and loneliness. Many jesters did not choose their jobs. They often came from difficult or unfortunate backgrounds. Some were children taken from poor families or orphanages, with no one else to care for them. Others had disabilities or differences that made life hard in a time when people were less understanding. Some were street performers or wandering fools who caught the attention of a king or noble and were brought to court. To be a jester was often not a matter of choice, but survival. It was a job that offered some protection and food, but demanded endless performance and carefulness. In a world where social classes were strictly divided, The jester belonged to no one group. He was not noble, yet he lived among nobles. He was not a servant in the usual sense, but had to obey strict orders. He was a performer, but his role was far more complicated than just making people laugh. The jester's costume was a kind of mask. Bright colors and jingling bells covered a complicated person who had to be many things at once. He was a clown who could perform silly tricks like juggling balls or pretending to trip and fall. He was a musician who could play a lute, drum, or other instruments to delight the court. He was a storyteller who spun funny tales, riddles, or even subtle messages about the kingdom's problems hidden inside jokes. Every night, the jester performed in the great hall of the castle. This was a large room with long wooden tables where the king, queen, nobles, and guests gathered to eat, drink, and listen. The walls were made of cold stone, often covered with colorful tapestries showing scenes of battle or hunting. Torches and candles flickered softly, casting warm but dancing shadows. The jester had no stage, no curtains, just the cold floor and the eyes of a crowd expecting entertainment. The air might be filled with the smell of roasted meat, wine, and burning wood from the hearth. Guests laughed, clinked goblets, and whispered, while the jester worked hard to keep the mood light. The job was exhausting, juggling, dancing, singing, telling jokes, and playing instruments could last for hours. The jester needed energy, skill, and endurance. Sometimes, the king asked for personal jokes, riddles, or stories about specific guests, which required quick thinking and a sharp mind. But the castle was not always a place of joy. Beneath the laughter and feasts were secrets and dangers. Nobles sometimes plotted against each other. The king's advisors whispered in dark corners about war, taxes, and power. The jester, though seen as a fool, had to be aware of these dangers. One careless joke about a powerful lord could mean exile or death. After the laughter faded and the guests left, the jester was often left alone. The castle halls were cold and drafty at night. Stone floors echoed with empty footsteps. The jester might find a small room or corner to rest, but he rarely shared the warmth or comfort the nobles enjoyed. Despite these hardships, some jesters became close to their kings. Their humor gave them a strange kind of power, the power to speak truths others dared not say. Through jokes and stories, they could advise the king, warn of dangers, or remind him of his duties. But this power was fragile. It depended on the king's mood and trust, and it could vanish at any moment. The jester's role slowly changed as time went on. The royal courts grew less dependent on jesters, and entertainment moved into theaters and traveling shows. The colorful costumes and jingling bells faded from castles, yet the spirit of the jester, the mix of joy, sadness, wisdom, and risk, remains alive today in comedians, storytellers, and performers. So tonight, as you rest and listen, picture the jester moving through cold stone halls, bells softly jingling, carrying the heavy burden of laughter in a world that was often hard and unkind. The sun begins to rise over the stone towers of the castle, casting warm light over the green fields and forests beyond. Inside the castle walls, the day is just starting for many, including the court jester. But the jester's day is unlike anyone else's, full of preparation, performance, and quiet moments in between. For the jester, morning begins quietly, unlike the nobles who wake in soft beds surrounded by silk sheets and warm blankets. The jester's room is often small and cold, with bare stone walls and a thin mattress or a straw-filled pallet. Sometimes, the jester's living quarters are tucked away in a dark corner of the castle, near the kitchens or stables, where the noise and smells can be strong. The jester rises early to prepare for the long day ahead. He carefully puts on his colorful clothes, patches of red, green, yellow, and blue, sewn together in a bright, mismatched pattern. His hat, with its 3 floppy points and tiny bells, is placed just so, ready to jingle softly with every step. His face might be painted with simple designs, maybe a red dot on the nose or lines around the eyes to make his expressions stand out more. Sometimes he wears a mask or makeup that changes with the day's mood. This costume is his armor and his mask, helping him transform from an ordinary man into the jester. The jester's mornings often start with practice. He rehearses juggling balls, perfects his dance moves, tunes his lute or drum, and practices jokes and stories. He must be ready to entertain nobles with clever words and swift movements. In the castle's corridors, the jester might stop to watch the knights preparing for training or the cooks busy in the kitchens. He listens closely, learning the news of the day and what mood the king might be in. This knowledge is important. It helps him plan what kind of jokes or tricks will work best. Sometimes the jester visits the king's chambers to drop off a gift or deliver a message disguised as a joke. If the king is awake and in a good mood, he might listen with a smile. If the king is angry or busy, the jester might be quickly sent away. As the day moves on, the castle fills with activity. Servants prepare the great hall for meals. Nobles gather to discuss politics or business, and the king holds court. This is the time when the jester's role becomes most important. The jester performs during feasts and gatherings, moving among the long tables, telling jokes, juggling, dancing, and singing. He listens carefully to the reactions of the king and guests, adjusting his act if a joke falls flat or if the mood changes. His performance is not just about fun, it is a careful balancing act. The jester must be funny, but not disrespectful. He must tease and entertain, but avoid offending the powerful people around him. He might slip in a clever comment about a noble's bad behavior, or remind the king of a forgotten duty, all hidden in humor, so the truth can be heard without anger. Between performances, the jester often has little time to rest. He might help with small tasks around the castle, or quietly observe the court, learning about secrets and plans. Sometimes he is sent on errands by the king or nobles, delivering messages or spying on rivals. Though he entertains the court, the jester rarely shares in its luxuries. His food might be simple bread and cheese, and his bed hard and cold. He is both part of the castle and apart from it. At times, the jester's life is lonely. Nobles do not invite him to their private meetings or gardens. Servants treat him as a fool or servant rather than a companion. He is watched, but not truly seen. Still, some jesters find moments of friendship and joy. They form bonds with other entertainers, musicians, and servants. They share stories and songs, creating small pockets of warmth in the cold stone castle. As the day ends, the great hall empties, and the torches burn low. The jester prepares to rest. The bells on his hat are silent now. He sheds his bright costume and makeup, returning to the quiet shadows. Though the day has been long and full of laughter, the jester often feels the weight of his role. Behind every joke is a careful dance with danger. His freedom to speak truth is limited and risky. The jester's story is one of contrasts, laughter and loneliness, joy and fear, freedom and danger. In the next part, we will explore the clever ways jesters protected themselves and survived in this difficult world using wit, charm, and sometimes a little magic. The life of a medieval court jester was not just about telling jokes and juggling. Behind the laughter and color, jesters had to be clever survivors. To live in the castle and keep their place, they used many tricks, not just with their hands, but with their minds, their words, and their very presence. The castle was a place of power, rules, and dangers hidden beneath the surface. Kings and nobles had enemies everywhere, inside their own courts and outside in the lands around them. A jester might seem like a fool, but to survive, he had to be sharp and quick, always watching and listening. One of the most important tricks the jester used was reading the mood. He had to understand the king's feelings at every moment. Was the king happy or angry? Was he tired or full of energy? Was there a celebration or a serious meeting? If the jester told a joke at the wrong time, it could offend the king or nobles and end badly. So, the jester learned to watch carefully the way the king's eyes moved, the tone of his voice, even the way his body relaxed or stiffened. This skill was like a secret language between the jester and the court. Another key to survival was the art of speaking in riddles and double meanings. The jester's words were often clever puzzles. On the surface, a joke might be silly and light, but underneath it, there could be a sharp message or warning. For example, if the king was making a bad decision, the jester might tell a story about a foolish king who lost his crown. The story was funny, but carried a serious lesson. Only the king and those paying close attention would understand the warning. This way, the jester could speak truths without angering powerful people. His role as a fool gave him a kind of protection, but it was always fragile. If a noble felt insulted, the jester could be punished. Jesters were also skilled in many forms of entertainment beyond jokes. They sang songs, played instruments, performed acrobatics, and juggled. These talents made them popular and useful at court. Music was a powerful tool. A jester who could play the lute or harp could lift the spirits of the whole court. Songs were not just entertainment. They carried messages, told stories, and even helped the jester build friendships. Some jesters were also dancers, performing graceful or silly moves to amuse guests. The more skills a jester had, the more valuable he was. But jesters didn't only use their talents to entertain, they also used charm and wit to protect themselves. Being funny was a way to win friends and avoid enemies. Jesters had to be careful with their words, but they were also clever with their actions. They learned to listen more than they spoke, gathering secrets like a spider collects silk. In some courts, jesters acted as unofficial advisors or spies. Kings trusted their jesters to report what they heard in the castle, sometimes even secrets that others kept hidden. Because everyone thought the jester was just a fool, he could move unnoticed, slipping in and out of rooms, overhearing conversations. This secret role gave the jester power, but also danger. If caught spying or telling a secret joke, the jester could be punished severely. Some jesters disappeared from court mysteriously. Rumors whispered that they had been banished or worse. Still, many jesters were brave and clever, using their role to protect the kingdom and the king. Their jokes and stories helped ease tensions, making difficult news easier to hear. Another survival trick was the ability to adapt. Jesters changed their acts depending on the court, the king, and the occasion. A jester in one kingdom might be silly and loud, in another, quiet and clever. This flexibility kept them employed and safe. The best jesters could adjust their jokes and stories quickly, knowing when to push a little and when to hold back. Sometimes, jesters also traveled between courts, performing for different kings and nobles. Traveling was dangerous, but it offered freedom and new opportunities. Despite their skill and charm, jesters often lived with the constant fear of losing their place. If a king died or was overthrown, the new ruler might not want a jester. Without a protector, a jester could quickly become homeless, or worse. This fear made jesters humble and careful. They learned to laugh at themselves and others, using humor as a shield against hard times. In the quiet moments between performances, jesters sometimes confided in each other. They shared stories of their travels, tricks to survive, and the secret pains they carried beneath their painted smiles. Though their lives were difficult, jesters found moments of joy in friendship, music, and the thrill of making others laugh. So, as you listen tonight, remember the jester's clever mind and quick hands, their courage to speak truths hidden in laughter, and the delicate dance they performed every day to survive in a world that was often harsh and unkind. The jester's story is not just about ordinary fools in forgotten castles. Some medieval jesters became famous, their cleverness, bravery, and humor leaving marks on history. Tonight, we journey deeper into the tales of some of the most remarkable jesters, whose lives show the many faces of this unusual role. Imagine a bustling, medieval court, full of the rich scents of incense and roasted meats, bright tapestries hanging from stone walls, and voices rising in laughter and debate. Among the nobles and knights moves a man dressed in colorful clothes, bells tinkling softly as he steps. But this jester is more than an entertainer. He is a storyteller, a secret advisor, a survivor, and sometimes a legend. One of the most famous jesters was Will Somers, who served King Henry VIII of England. Will was known for his quick wit and bold humor. Legend tells that he had a sharp tongue and was not afraid to speak frankly to the king, sometimes teasing Henry about his many wives or his temper. Unlike many jesters who lived in fear of their kings, Will Sommers was said to have a special place in the court. Henry VIII liked him and trusted him enough to listen to his jokes and advice. Will's bravery gave him protection, and his cleverness helped the king laugh even in difficult times. Stories say that Will Sommers once told Henry that he looked too angry and needed to laugh more. The king laughed so hard he forgave a noble who had annoyed him. This shows the unusual power of the jester's humor to ease tension and change moods. Far from England, in the courts of France, another famous jester was Triboulet, who served King Francis I. Triboulet was not only a comedian but also a poet and musician. He was clever and used his wit to entertain, but also to challenge the king in subtle ways. Triboulet's story is full of daring jokes and clever wordplay. He sometimes mocked the king's decisions, but always with a smile and enough charm to avoid punishment. He was known for his playful insults and quick replies, which made the court both laugh and think. The story goes that when a noble tried to punish Triboulet for a joke, the king intervened, saying, "He is my jester. Let him say what he will." This shows how some jesters were protected by their king's favor, a rare and valuable gift. Then there was Nasreddin Hoja, a legendary figure from the Middle East, whose stories have been told for centuries. Nasreddin was a jester, philosopher, and teacher, famous for his funny tales that often carried deep lessons. Unlike European jesters who performed at courts, Nasreddin was a wandering fool, traveling from village to village. His stories were simple, yet clever, full of humor and wisdom. They often showed the foolishness of people's actions and the importance of thinking carefully. One famous Nasreddin story tells how he once rode his donkey backward, confusing his neighbors. When asked why, he said he wanted to see where he had been, not just where he was going. This story, like many others, uses humor to teach a lesson about life and perspective. Each of these jesters shows a different side of the role. Some were close to kings, protected by royal favor. Others traveled far, sharing their stories with common people. Some used humor to teach, others to survive, and some to quietly change the course of history. But not all jesters had happy endings. Many lived short, difficult lives, forgotten by time, their names lost in dusty old books or whispered only in legends. The colorful costumes and jingling bells faded, but their spirit lived on in the laughter they brought and the truths they told. Though the jester's role may seem light-hearted and silly on the surface, beneath the laughter lay a surprising and sometimes powerful force in medieval courts. Jesters were not only entertainers, but also secret players in the game of politics and power. In a time when kings and nobles made decisions that shaped entire kingdoms, information was precious. Who knew what and when could mean the difference between war and peace, between life and death. The jester, with his freedom to speak and move more freely than most, often found himself in the middle of these hidden currents. One of the jester's most important secret powers was his ability to speak truth to power in a way others could not. While nobles had to be careful with their words, and advisors often spoke only what they thought rulers wanted to hear, the jester could use humor to point out faults, mistakes, or dangers. Because jesters were officially fools, their words were not always taken seriously. Yet that was their strength. They could say things others dared not speak, wrapped in jokes or stories. Kings sometimes relied on their jesters to remind them of reality, to challenge arrogance, or to warn of threats. In some courts, jesters acted as confidants and advisors. They listened to rumors, overheard plots, and learned secrets. With their quick minds and keen observations, jesters gathered valuable information and sometimes shared it with their kings in clever ways. For example, a jester might tell a funny story about a dishonest noble or a careless general, hinting at real problems in the kingdom. The king, amused but alert, would consider the hidden message. This role was risky. If a jester's words offended the wrong person, the consequences could be severe. Some jesters lost their lives or were banished for overstepping boundaries. Others were imprisoned or punished harshly. Still, many jesters navigated these dangers with skill and caution. Their survival depended on knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, when to tease and when to flatter. Some historical jesters are remembered for their political influence. For example, Archibald Armstrong, jester to King James VI and I, was known for his sharp tongue and bold comments. He advised the king and even helped influence court decisions. Armstrong's story shows that jesters could wield real power, though always hidden beneath their clownish roles. Their influence was like a shadow, present but unseen by most. Jesters could also use their performances to shape public opinion. In a time when most people were illiterate, stories and jokes were powerful tools to spread ideas and influence how people thought. By making fun of certain nobles, policies, or events, jesters could sway the mood of the court and sometimes the kingdom. They became voices for the common people, using humor to point out injustice or folly. However, not all rulers welcomed this influence. Some kings saw their jesters as threats, and their relationship was tense. A jester's role was always uncertain, dependent on the ruler's mood and favor. The jester's political role was part of a delicate balance between entertainment and influence, between laughter and warning. Their ability to move between these worlds made them unique and sometimes indispensable. Tonight, as you rest, imagine the jester moving quietly through castle halls, listening and watching, their laughter hiding sharp eyes and a clever mind. Behind every joke was a hidden message, a small but powerful act of courage. When we picture a medieval jester, the first things that often come to mind are the bright, mismatched clothes, the jingling bells, and the strange hats with floppy points. These colorful costumes and tools were not just for show. They were powerful symbols, carefully designed to shape the jester's role and identity. Imagine a jester stepping into the great hall of a castle. Their costume is a patchwork of bright reds, greens, yellows, and blues. Each piece of cloth is stitched together like a puzzle, sometimes with diamond or checkered patterns. The bells sewn into the hat and shoes jingle softly with every step, announcing the jester's presence before they even speak. This colorful outfit made the jester stand out immediately in a world of dark stone walls and heavy wooden furniture. The jester was a living splash of light and sound. The most famous part of the costume was the fool's cap. This hat often had 3 floppy points, each ending with a small bell. Some say the 3 points represented a donkey's ears and tail, symbolizing foolishness and humility. Others believe they stood for the jester's ability to entertain the head, thought, heart, emotion, and feet, movement. Wearing the fool's cap was a kind of badge, a symbol that said, "I am the fool, but I am also free to speak." The jester's outfit also included bright tights or pants, often mismatched in colors or patterns, and a tunic with bells sewn along the edges. The jingling bells were not just decorative, they served a purpose. The sound announced the jester's arrival and kept the mood light. It reminded everyone that laughter was coming. The bells also helped protect the jester if someone tried to sneak up on them or catch them by surprise. The jingling would warn the jester. Jesters carried many tools of their trade beyond costumes. They used small musical instruments like the lute, flute, or tambourine to add music to their performances. Music helped set the tone, cheerful songs to lift spirits, slow tunes to calm, or lively rhythms to get everyone dancing. Another important tool was the bauble, a mock scepter or stick often topped with a carved head of a fool or a tiny puppet. The bauble was a symbol of the jester's role as a king of fools, a playful parody of royal power. Holding the bauble, the jester could mimic the gestures of kings and nobles, turning serious ceremonies into moments of fun and laughter. The jester's makeup was also key to their identity. Their face was often painted white, with bright red cheeks and lips, sometimes with exaggerated eyebrows or tears. This makeup transformed the jester's face into a mask, both hiding and revealing emotions. The painted face allowed the jester to express feelings more boldly, whether joy, surprise, or mock sadness. It was part of the performance, making the jester's expressions clear even to the farthest corner of the hall. Costumes and tools also helped define the jester's status. While all jesters wore bright clothes, the quality and style could show their importance in court. A favored jester might have richer fabrics, more bells, or a special bauble made by the court's best craftspeople. These costumes were not just for fun. They were a form of communication, telling the court who the jester was and what they could do. The colorful costume also set boundaries. The jester was free to speak and joke, but only within the role the costume defined. It was a kind of contract with the king and the court. I will amuse you and speak truths wrapped in laughter, but only as your fool. This made the jester's freedom both powerful and fragile. Beyond the castle, jesters sometimes wore simpler costumes. Traveling performers needed clothes that could be washed and mended easily, and that did not attract too much attention outside the court. Still, Even on the road, jesters kept some symbols of their trade: a small bell, a funny hat, or a simple bauble. These signs connected them to their role and gave them a kind of identity in the wide, often lonely world. Tonight, as you imagine the jester's colorful clothes and jingling bells, think about how these bright symbols held a special power. They announced the fool who could speak truth, make kings laugh, and bring light to dark halls. Imagine waking up in a small, simple room within the castle walls. The sun's first light peeks through a tiny window, casting soft shadows on the cold stone floor. This is the beginning of a jester's day, a day filled with unexpected moments, hard work, and a strange kind of freedom. The jester's morning often started quietly, long before the hall filled with nobles and courtiers. Unlike the kings and queens who slept late in their luxurious chambers, the jester rose early to prepare for the day ahead. There was no time for lingering or rest. First came the important task of getting dressed. The jester carefully put on the bright, colorful costume, a patchwork of reds, greens, yellows, and blues. Each piece was stitched with care, and every bell had to be sewn tightly to jingle just right. Then came the fool's cap, its floppy points jingling softly as it was placed on the head. Finally, the jester painted their face with a white makeup, adding bright red cheeks and lips, and sometimes drawing funny shapes around the eyes. This mask transformed the jester from a man or woman into a symbol of laughter and folly. Once dressed and ready, the jester might practice music or jokes in a quiet corner. Songs had to be learned perfectly, stories memorized, and new jokes crafted to keep the court entertained. The jester's work was never done. They had to be ready for anything. When the castle doors opened and the nobles began to gather, the jester's day truly began. They moved through the halls, greeting servants, knights, and ladies, always alert for signs of mood or tension. The jester's role was to observe closely, to notice when the king looked tired or angry, when a noble was worried, or when the court grew dull. With a well-timed joke, a funny dance, or a silly song, the jester could lighten the mood and bring smiles to serious faces. In the great hall, during feasts or important meetings, the jester performed their most important task. They entertained the crowd with stories, songs, acrobatics, and jokes. Sometimes they mocked the nobles, teasing them gently or making fun of the king himself. This teasing was more than just fun. It was a way to remind the powerful not to take themselves too seriously, to see their faults, and to stay humble. The jester was a mirror held up to the court, reflecting both its glory and its flaws. Between performances, the jester often mingled with servants and other entertainers. These moments were important for friendship and support. The jester might share a quiet meal with the cooks or swap stories with musicians. These small connections helped ease the loneliness of court life. The jester's day could also include moments of danger. If a joke offended the wrong person, the jester had to be ready to apologize, explain, or quickly change the subject. Their safety depended on their skill with words and their ability to read people. When the day's performances ended and the nobles returned to their chambers, the jester's work was not quite finished. They might practice new songs or prepare new jokes for the next day. Sometimes they met with the king in private, offering advice wrapped in humor or listening carefully to the ruler's worries. At night, after the castle grew quiet and the last candle flickered low, the jester returned to their small room. Here, away from the crowds, they could rest their tired body and let their true self emerge beneath the mask. Though the jester's life was hard and full of challenges, it was also full of creativity and freedom. The jester chose their words carefully, crafted their jokes like poems, and danced through life with a unique rhythm. So tonight, as you relax, picture the jester's day. From the soft morning light to the quiet night, their life was a dance of color and sound, laughter and courage, light and shadow. While the life of a medieval court jester sparkled with bright costumes and joyful laughter, behind the scenes lay shadows that often went unseen. For all their cleverness and humor, jesters faced dangers and hardships that could be as heavy as any knight's armor. Imagine the jester standing alone in the quiet corridors after a long day of entertaining. The laughter has faded, the crowds have dispersed, and the weight of the day begins to settle. While many enjoyed the jester's company, not everyone welcomed their sharp wit or bold jokes. Because the jester's role was to speak truths hidden inside humor, they sometimes crossed lines that others could not. A joke about a noble's greed or a king's mistake could spark anger. Even the king, who enjoyed the jester's humor, could grow impatient or offended. If the jester's words offended someone powerful, the consequences could be harsh. Unlike other courtiers who had protections and allies, jesters were vulnerable. They had no noble titles or armies to defend them. Some jesters faced punishments ranging from harsh words and exile from court to imprisonment, or worse. History tells stories of jesters who were beaten or cast out for jokes that were too true or too bold. Jesters also faced danger from the difficult lives they often came from. Many were born poor, orphaned, or even sold into service. Their life as an entertainer was sometimes the only way they survived, but it offered little security. Traveling jesters, who performed in villages and towns far from castles, faced even greater risks. Roads were dangerous, and strangers were not always kind to those who were different or foolish. Weather, hunger, and illness could threaten their fragile existence. Many traveling performers had no permanent home, relying on the kindness of strangers and the coins tossed after a good joke or song. The emotional toll of the jester's life was heavy too. Constantly hiding true feelings behind laughter could be exhausting. Jesters had to carry the weight of sorrow and loneliness inside, while showing only joy on the outside. Some jesters turned to alcohol or other means to ease the pain of their difficult lives. Others found solace in music, poetry, or secret friendships away from the court's eyes. Despite these hardships, many jesters showed incredible strength and resilience. Their humor was not just a mask, but a shield, a way to survive and even thrive in a harsh world. The darker side of the jester's life reminds us that laughter often hides deeper stories. Behind every smile is a human heart, full of struggles and hopes. Tonight, as you rest, think about the jester's courage. not just to make others laugh, but to face the shadows of their own life. Their story is one of light and dark, joy and sorrow, woven together like the colors of their costume. The world of medieval jesters is full of colorful characters whose names have traveled through time. Some became legends, remembered not just for their jokes, but for their wisdom, bravery, and unique influence on history. One of the most famous jesters was Will Somers, who served King Henry VIII of England. Somers was known for his quick wit and fearless humor. Unlike many jesters who stayed hidden in the shadows, Somers had the rare privilege of speaking openly with the king, even criticizing him when needed. Will Somers wasn't just a clown. He was a trusted companion to Henry VIII. Stories tell how Somers used jokes to ease the king's anger and remind him of his human side. When Henry's moods were dark and stormy, Somers could lighten the room with a well-placed joke or a silly dance. Another famous jester was Triboulet, who served King Francis I of France. Triboulet was clever and sometimes sharp-tongued, but he survived court intrigues because he knew how to balance humor with respect. Triboulet once made a joke that almost cost him his life, but he saved himself with quick thinking and charm. His story shows how jesters lived on the edge, their survival depending on wit as much as skill. In Scotland, the jester Geordie Riddell was known not only for laughter, but also for his wisdom. Geordie advised nobles and kings, sometimes using riddles and stories to teach lessons. His jokes carried hidden meanings, making him a kind of secret teacher. Some jesters were also poets, musicians, and storytellers. They collected tales from distant lands and brought news from faraway places. Their performances were like traveling libraries, spreading knowledge and culture in a time when books were rare. Jesters also inspired art and literature. Shakespeare wrote about fools who spoke truth, like the fool in King Lear, who used humor to reveal deep truths about human nature. These stories remind us that jesters were more than just entertainers. They were observers of life, holding up mirrors to society with kindness and courage. But not all famous jesters were welcome in history's spotlight. Many remain unknown, their stories lost in time, yet their laughter still echoes through the halls of old castles, reminding us of their presence. Tonight, as you rest, imagine the great jesters of history, their voices rising in laughter and song. Their courage and wit shine like stars in the night sky, guiding us through the ages. In the grand halls of medieval castles, amidst the banners and the glittering armor, an unlikely friendship often blossomed between the king and his jester. This bond was built on laughter, trust, and a deep understanding that transcended titles and power. Kings ruled vast lands, commanded armies, and made decisions that affected thousands. Yet, behind the throne, they were human, with fears, doubts, and moments of loneliness. The jester, with their freedom to speak plainly and humorously, offered a rare kind of companionship. Unlike noble advisors who might flatter the king or speak with careful politeness, the jester could tell the truth, wrapped in jokes. This honesty was precious to rulers who needed reminders not to become proud or blind to their faults. In some courts, the king and jester shared quiet moments away from the eyes of courtiers. They talked, laughed, and sometimes confided in each other. The jester's role went beyond entertainment. It was about being a friend, a mirror, and sometimes a guardian of the king's heart. Take the example of King Henry VIII and his jester, Will Somers. Despite Henry's fearsome reputation, he trusted Somers deeply. Somers could make the king laugh during dark times and even challenge him with clever words. Their friendship was a delicate dance of respect and playfulness, showing how humor could soften the hardest hearts. In France, King Francis I's jester, Triboulet, enjoyed a similar closeness with his ruler. Triboulet's bold jokes tested the king's patience, but also reminded him of his responsibilities. This bond helped keep the king grounded, balancing power with humility. But this trust was not easy to earn. Jesters had to prove their loyalty and wisdom, showing that behind their playful masks lay sharp minds and kind hearts. If a jester betrayed that trust, the consequences could be severe. Yet when the bond was strong, it became a source of strength for both. The relationship between jesters and kings reveals a truth about power, that true leadership requires listening to voices that are honest, even if they come with laughter. Tonight, as you settle down to rest, think about the jester and the king, two souls connected by humor, trust, and the shared journey through life's challenges. In the lively rhythm of a medieval castle, where power and ceremony often took center stage, the jester was much more than just a performer. They were the heartbeat of the court, bringing color, laughter, and a unique perspective that shaped daily life and culture. Imagine a castle alive with activity. Nobles in rich gowns and shining armor move through echoing halls. Servants rush by with trays of food and cups of wine. The air hums with whispers of politics, plots, and plans. In the midst of this, the jester dances, sings, and tells stories, bringing warmth and light to a sometimes cold and serious world. The jester's influence stretched far beyond jokes and music. Their presence shaped the atmosphere of the court, turning stiff ceremonies into joyful events and making long days bearable. When a king or queen sat on their throne, the jester's role was to ease tensions and remind everyone that beneath the robes and crowns, they were all human. Jesters also played an important role during festivals and celebrations, which were central to medieval life. Festivals marked the changing seasons, religious holidays, and special occasions like royal weddings or victories in battle. During these times, the court would fill with feasts, dances, and performances. The jester led the entertainment, using humor and music to unite everyone in shared joy. These celebrations were not just fun. They were vital to the community. They helped strengthen bonds between nobles and their subjects and reminded everyone of their place in the larger world. The jester, with their joyful spirit, was the spark that kept these gatherings alive and memorable. Another way jesters influenced culture was through their stories and songs. In a time when few people could read or write, jesters acted as living libraries. They traveled from court to court, carrying tales from distant lands and news of events far away. Their stories mixed history, legend, and humor, teaching lessons and inspiring listeners. Some jesters were poets and musicians, composing verses that became popular across regions. Their songs could celebrate heroic deeds, warn of dangers, or simply make people laugh. By sharing these tales, jesters helped spread culture and knowledge, connecting different parts of medieval Europe. The jester's ability to mock and mimic also influenced fashion and manners at court. They often parodied the nobles' elaborate clothes and behaviors, showing the absurdity of excessive pride or vanity. This playful criticism encouraged humility and self-awareness among the powerful, reminding them that appearances were not everything. Jesters were also skilled in language and wordplay. They invented clever rhymes, riddles, and puns that entertained, but also made people think. This love of language contributed to the rich tradition of medieval poetry and literature. In fact, some of the greatest writers, like Shakespeare, drew inspiration from the clever fool who speaks truth in jest. The role of the jester extended into political life as well. While not formal advisors, jesters influenced decisions by offering insight wrapped in humor. Kings and queens sometimes sought the jester's opinion because their unique position allowed them to see beyond flattery and fear. By pointing out the flaws or dangers in a playful way, jesters helped rulers avoid mistakes and connect with their people. At the same time, jesters maintained a delicate balance. They had to be careful not to offend powerful nobles or cross lines that could lead to punishment. Their skill in navigating court politics through humor was a kind of art, one that required intelligence, bravery, and emotional strength. Beyond the castle walls, jesters also impacted the lives of ordinary people. Traveling performers brought laughter and stories to villages and towns, breaking the monotony of daily work. Their visits were eagerly awaited, providing moments of joy and connection in a hard world. In this way, jesters helped build a shared culture, a world of stories, songs, and laughter that united people across classes and regions. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, imagine the jester's laughter echoing through castle halls and village squares alike. Their spirit shaped the world around them, reminding us all of the power of joy, humor, and kindness. In the towering stone halls of the medieval world, where kings and queens ruled with might, and knights donned heavy armor to ride into battle, a special, quieter relationship often bloomed between two very different souls, the jester and the child. One brought endless energy, curiosity, and unfiltered honesty. The other brought laughter, stories, and gentle mischief. And when they came together, something truly magical happened. Children in the medieval courts lived lives that, by modern standards, were anything but carefree. The sons of nobles were often groomed from a young age to become warriors or diplomats. The daughters were taught manners and expected to marry for alliance rather than love. Even royal children bore heavy expectations. Yet, in the midst of this formality, the jester was often the one adult who could truly speak to a child as a friend, and more importantly, as an equal. Jesters saw childhood not as something to control or suppress, but to celebrate. To them, A child's wonder and silliness were gifts to be nurtured, not corrected. While other adults might hush a child's giggles in the great hall, the jester would join in with an exaggerated tumble or a ridiculous face, turning the giggle into a full-blown fit of laughter. Many jesters had special routines just for children. They created puppet shows using scraps of cloth, carved simple wooden dolls, and staged little plays that made fun of grown-up life. They invented funny dances with names like the Crooked Chicken or the King's Socks, and would coax the children to join them. With children, the jester did not have to hide behind double meanings or political caution. Their jokes could be pure nonsense, their songs silly and carefree. This freedom, so rare in the rest of their role, was deeply cherished. At night, the jester might be asked to sit by a royal child's bed and tell a story, not the serious tales of war or kings, but fanciful stories of talking animals, enchanted forests, and brave mice who outwitted cats. These tales, while playful, often contained gentle lessons about kindness, courage, and the value of being clever over being cruel. In fact, some jesters became lifelong companions to royal children. They were the ones who knew what made the young prince laugh so hard milk came out of his nose, or the rhyme that calmed the young princess when thunder shook the windows. This companionship created a deep emotional bond, and sometimes, when those children grew into rulers, they remembered their jester's wisdom more than any noble's flattery. There is a story, half history, half legend, of a young princess who cried every night, homesick and lonely in a foreign castle. No one could comfort her. That is, until a jester with a bright yellow cap arrived. He didn't bow. He didn't speak formally. Instead, he stuck out his tongue and rolled on the floor like a tumbleweed. The princess stopped crying and then laughed. Every night after that, he told her stories and sang silly songs until she slept. Her little hand curled into his worn sleeve. Years later, when she became queen, she ordered that jesters always be welcomed in her court, for the sake of the sad child in all of us. But jesters didn't just entertain royal children. In the villages and marketplaces, when traveling jesters passed through, children came running. They didn't have polished floors or golden cups, but their laughter was just as rich. For these children, the jester brought a glimpse of magic. Their world might be filled with chores, hunger, or illness, but for one moment, a funny stranger turned the town square into a place of dreams. They saw hats that twirled, spoons that danced, and songs that made the chickens cluck in rhythm. And in that laughter, children found something rare: lightness, freedom, and hope. Jesters understood something profound, something many adults forget: that children are not small adults. They are creatures of wonder. They notice the spider on the windowsill, the way a puddle reflects the moon, and how a single kind word can change an entire day. In a world that often demanded obedience and silence from the young, jesters offered them respect and attention. They listened. They played. They knelt down to their level and said, "Tell me your story." Not every jester was good and kind. Just like in any walk of life, some were rough, selfish, or careless. But the truly gifted jesters, the ones remembered in stories and songs, understood that to care for a child's laughter was to care for the future, because those children grew up, and what they remembered wasn't the feast or the throne, but the jester who made them feel seen. In their own way, jesters became protectors of innocence, not by sheltering children from sadness, but by reminding them that joy still lived in the world, even in dark times. Their stories offered a safe place for children to explore fear, wonder, and courage, all while tucked under a wool blanket beside the hearth. And for the jester, the bond with children may have been one of the purest parts of their work. In the eyes of a child, they weren't fools, they were magicians, friends, heroes, and in those small hands tugging at their sleeve, in those wide eyes looking up in wonder, the jester perhaps found a kind of truth that no king or noble could ever give them. So tonight, as your thoughts settle and your breathing slows, picture a jester crouched on a castle floor, drawing a silly face on parchment for a laughing child. Picture them twirling through a dusty village square, followed by a trail of curious little ones. And as you drift into sleep, let that laughter guide you, light and free, as if carried on the wind from long ago. When we picture a jester in the medieval world, most of us imagine a man dressed in motley colors, bells jingling from his pointed cap, dancing in the great hall. And for the most part, that picture is accurate. Jesting, like many other professions of the time, was dominated by men. But nestled in the quieter corners of history are the remarkable stories of female jesters, clever, bold, and unforgettable women who dared to wear the cap and bells in a world built for kings and knights. These women, though fewer in number, brought a different energy to the court. They were sharp, observant, and often underestimated, and that, in itself, became their greatest strength. One of the earliest and most well-documented female jesters was Mathurin, a jester at the court of French kings during the late 1500s, particularly under Henry III, Henry IV, and even Louis III. Mathurin dressed in Amazonian armor and carried a wooden sword, using her costume not just to entertain, but to comment on power, gender, and the absurdity of war. Mathurin was more than a comic. She was a satirist, a symbol, and in her own way, a kind of warrior. Not with weapons, but with wit. She used her stage presence to challenge norms, to mimic men of power, and to hold a mirror up to the court. In a world where women were expected to be quiet and obedient, Mathurin roared with laughter and intellect. We don't know if Mathurin was born into poverty or came from a background in theater or music, but her talent lifted her into royal circles, and she held her place there, not through beauty or noble birth, but through the strength of her mind and the boldness of her performance. Her jests were not always gentle. She sometimes ridiculed courtiers who took themselves too seriously, or made fun of royal decisions that put lives at risk. But like many jesters before her, Mathurin walked a fine line. She knew how far she could go, when to step back, and when to twist a blade of truth just deep enough to make a point. But Mathurin wasn't the only one. History whispers of other women who took up the motley cloak. In Spain, there were bufonas, women who performed for the royal court, and sometimes rose to prominent positions. Some were dancers, some musicians, and others masters of mimicry and riddles. In Italy, during the Renaissance, female performers mixed jesting with theater and poetry. Though not always labeled as jesters, they played a similar role, entertaining the court, critiquing society, and daring to speak truths no one else could. For these women, the world was full of obstacles. Medieval and early modern societies were strict, deeply patriarchal, and resistant to women in roles that gave them voice and influence. A male jester could make fun of a duke. A female jester doing the same risked being seen as insolent, unnatural, or even dangerous. But that danger became part of the magic. These women knew how to work a room, how to play to their audience, and how to survive in the shark-infested waters of royal politics. They often used humor in unexpected ways, playing the flirt, the fool, the crone, the child, all roles women were allowed to play in society. But behind the act was strategy. A clever bufona might use a love song to mock a failed marriage alliance. A female jester might pretend to be simple-minded while quietly gathering information to pass along to her allies or even to the queen. In many cases, these women had to perform even better than their male counterparts just to earn a place. Their routines were sharp, their costumes daring, their timing perfect. They could sing, juggle, dance, and deliver biting lines without breaking character. And perhaps most remarkably, they were often remembered not with scorn, but with admiration. We should also remember that not all jesters, male or female, lived in grand courts. Some performed on the streets, in taverns, and on traveling stages. For women without wealth or family connections, jesting could be a form of survival. They earned coins for food, shelter, and a small sense of control in a world where most doors were closed to them. These performers became masters of adaptation. One day, they might be making nobles laugh at a country estate. The next, telling stories to children for bread in a muddy village square. These women jesters weren't just entertainers. They were rebels, observers, and storytellers. They saw the world with clear eyes and offered others the gift of perspective, wrapped in humor and performance. There's something deeply poetic about their legacy. Though few portraits or documents remain, their echoes linger in the sparkle of a stage light, in the rhythm of a rhyme, in the courage to speak when silence is expected. We find them. They remind us that history isn't only made by kings and battles. Sometimes it's shaped by a woman in mismatched stockings, twirling in the center of a grand hall, making an entire court laugh and think. Tonight, as you lay your head down, imagine the jingle of tiny bells in the stillness of a royal court. Picture a woman in patchwork clothes, standing tall in a sea of polished armor and velvet robes. She grins, bows, and speaks truth. In the sweetest, sharpest song, she is the jester, bold, brilliant, and free, and her laughter still lives on. Let's say you were a jester in the court of a powerful king. You had your patchwork clothes, your lute, your sharp tongue, and a few silly dances up your sleeve. Most days, you lived by your wit, making nobles laugh, soothing the queen's bad temper, entertaining guests when wine turned sour and tempers flared. But one wrong joke, one misread room, one insult that cut too deep, and suddenly your cap and bells could become a noose. Jesters lived close to power, and where there is power, there is danger. The tension behind the curtain. Imagine the grand hall of a medieval castle. The fire crackles in a massive hearth. Long tables stretch out, covered in greasy plates and half-finished goblets. Nobles laugh, their laughter rising and falling like waves. But under that laughter, politics churn like a hidden sea. Alliances hang in the balance. Marriages are being negotiated. Soldiers wait restlessly for orders. And in the middle of of this, the jester twirls and grins. The jester doesn't just tell jokes. He tells the truth in disguise. And not everyone appreciates being reminded of their pride, their vanity, or their hypocrisy, especially when it's done with a rhyme and a bow. The jester who went too far. Take the tale of Archibald Fitzcanter, a jester at the English court in the early 1300s. Archibald was clever, too clever, perhaps. He once joked that the king's new tax laws were so confusing that even the rats had stopped stealing grain because they were afraid of being fined. The court laughed, even the king smirked. But the next morning, Archibald found his chamber door bolted shut. No guards, no food, just silence. He was quietly dismissed, exiled to a monastery, they say, where no one could hear his clever words. A warning to all future jesters. Know the line and never step past it. Jesters were expected to be brave, yes, but also careful. Their role was a delicate performance of tension and release, a mockery that soothed, a truth that didn't sting too much. If they failed, the punishment could be swift. Some were beaten, others imprisoned, a few disappeared. Laughter. With shackles in many courts, jesters were seen not as people, but as possessions. They were listed among the spoons, the horses, and the wine barrels. Some were gifted between nobles, passed around like prized pets or exotic curiosities. Their freedom, if they had any, was always conditional, and that's what made their laughter so strange, so bittersweet. It was both a shield and a trap. Jesters often joked about their own status. I wear a cap so bright, one of them once said, so no one will see my chains. The politics of performance. The deeper you go into the medieval court, the clearer it becomes. Everything is theater. The king's speech is a performance. The noble's marriage is a statement. Even a feast is a show of power. And so, the jester becomes both the performer and the critic. Sometimes they were used as pawns. A lord might feed the jester a line to mock a rival. A queen might whisper a tale and ask the jester to sing it into a silly ballad. The jester's voice wasn't always his own, and if he refused, he might lose his place, or worse. So jesters learned to survive with cleverness, to bend like willow branches, to turn an insult into a compliment mid-sentence, to laugh even as they wept inside. The fool who became the scapegoat. There's another tale, this one from Hungary, of a jester named Janos the Bright-Eyed. Janos was beloved by the court. He danced, played fiddle, and was especially fond of pranks involving live chickens He made even the grimmest knights laugh until their bellies ached. But one spring, the court suffered a scandal. A secret letter was leaked, exposing a planned betrayal. Fingers were pointed, whispers flew, and no one wanted to be blamed. So they blamed Janos. He had access to everyone. He heard everything. And though there was no proof, the rumor took hold. He was called into the king's chamber one evening and never came out. Some say he was executed. Others say he was simply banished in silence. But either way, the laughter died that day. Behind the smile knot, all jesters met such grim fates. Many lived long lives, moving from court to court, passing down songs and stories to younger fools. But all of them, every single one, lived with a kind of weight beneath the giggle, a knowledge that the same court that cheered for them could one day turn cold. That's why some jesters became tricksters, not just in performance, but in life. They learned how to survive, how to hide secrets in riddles, how to gather favors quietly, or hold powerful people's confessions like coins in a secret purse. The wisest jesters were never just fools. They were watchers. They were listeners. And sometimes they were survivors in a world that didn't want them to win. The last laughter as the medieval era faded and the Renaissance dawned. Jesters began to disappear from courts. Their role changed. The printing press brought new forms of satire. Theater took center stage, and rulers began to see jesters not as necessities, but as relics. Some retired quietly. Others became street performers. A few took to writing, leaving behind cryptic poems and strange plays that only the clever could understand. And as they left the grand halls, so too did their laughter, replaced by politics, pride, and silence. And yet, they endure. Still, the spirit of the jester lives on. Every time someone dares to speak truth, to power with a smile, every time a child giggles at nonsense and refuses to take life too seriously, every time a performer dances in the town square, their hat outstretched and eyes sparkling with mischief, the jester returns, because they were never truly about bells and rhymes. They were about courage, about using laughter like a lantern in a dark, uncertain world. So tonight, as your thoughts settle, like dust in a quiet chamber, imagine that somewhere, deep in time, a jester leans against a stone wall. Their hat is worn, their shoes patched, but their eyes are bright. They watch the stars through a high window and whisper to no one, even if the king forgets me, the moon still laughs, and maybe that's enough. Once upon a time, not in a fairy tale, but in a real world of stone, castles, candlelight, and whispered intrigue, there walked a person who danced between joy and danger, with a voice like wind chimes and a wit like sharpened silver. The court jester was never just a clown. They were a guide, a mirror, storyteller. And now, as our long tale draws to a close, we follow the jester not to another feast, but toward the final curtain, toward the end of their age. By the close of the 16th century, the jester's world had changed. Courts were shifting. The great medieval halls, once alive with minstrels and fools, were slowly becoming more rigid, more restrained. New forms of entertainment, literature, theater, orchestras, ballet, had begun to sparkle in the eyes of nobles, and the fool, once seated close to the throne, found himself fading into shadow. It didn't happen overnight. Like all things in history, it was slow, like the way sunlight drains from the sky before dusk. You don't notice it right away, but when you do, the world feels a little colder. A time that passed like smoke. The age of jesters had always been a delicate balance between tradition and rebellion, but as kings and queens grew more concerned with order and appearance, the unpredictable charm of the jester became inconvenient. Laughter was still welcome, but now it had to be controlled, scripted, respectable. The jester's raw, spontaneous voice no longer fit into the polished, marble-lined courts of Europe's Renaissance rulers. So one by one, the jesters were dismissed. Some were thanked with pensions and sent to live out their days in quiet cottages. Others slipped into the streets, blending into the world of traveling performers. A few, perhaps the luckiest of all, retreated to villages where they told stories to children and sang songs by the hearth. But none of them stayed in the palace forever. Echoes in the theater, and yet, even in their absence, the jester lived on. You could find traces of them in the Commedia dell'arte of Italy, where masked characters like Arlecchino danced and tumbled and made mischief. You saw them again in the plays of Shakespeare, where fools like Festa, Touchstone, and the fool in King Lear were more than comic relief. They were the heart, the soul, the conscience of the story. These characters, though fictional, carried the spirit of the real jesters. They were clever, tragic, playful, and wise. They made us laugh, but more importantly, they made us think. Perhaps that was always the jester's secret goal, not just to entertain, but to awaken something. The jester's legacy. It's easy to imagine that when the last real court jester bowed for the final time, the bells on their cap gave one last jingle, and then silence. But history doesn't work that way, because ideas don't vanish. They transform. The jester, as a person, may have faded, but the jester, as an idea, as a symbol, only grew stronger. Today, we see echoes of them in comedians who challenge authority, in authors who mix truth with nonsense, in artists who mock the powerful with a wink. Their tools have changed. No more juggling pins or slapsticks. Now they wield microphones, cameras, keyboards. But the purpose is the same: to remind the world that power should be questioned, that truth can be playful, and that laughter is a kind of light, the heart behind the humor, and beyond their satire and song. Perhaps what made jesters most special was their humanity. They knew what it meant to be small in a big world. They lived on the edges of society, not quite noble, not quite servant. They saw everything, heard everything, and still chose to smile. That's the part of the jester that lingers with us, not the motley clothes or the silly dances, but the gentle defiance, the ability to find joy in sorrow, to speak softly in a loud world, to offer comfort even while making fun. That, in many ways, is the kind of bravery we all need. A candle in the dark. So now, as we bring our tale to a close, let's pause one last time in that candlelit hall. The fire is low. The guests are gone. The musicians have packed their lutes, and the throne sits empty, but in a corner of the room, just beyond the reach of the firelight, the jester lingers. Their eyes are tired, but kind. Their smile, soft and knowing, they look at us, not with mockery, but with understanding. They speak only once. The world will always need someone to laugh, to dance in the dust, to say what others won't, to listen when no one else does. And then they bow, not for the king, not for applause, but for us. A whisper to the dreamer, you, dear listener, have traveled far in this story. You've walked through the winding castles, felt the weight of velvet and gold. You've peeked behind curtains, followed the jesters through feast and fury. You've laughed with them, worried for them, rooted for them. And now, as your eyes grow heavy and the night leans in, know this. The jester may have been the fool, but they were never foolish. They were the dreamer, the doubter, the brave little voice in a very big room, just like you. So sleep softly, with a smile, and if, in your dreams, you hear a bell gently ring, perhaps the jester has come to say, good night. Thank you for joining this long, dreamy journey into the life of a medieval court jester. Their tale is over, but the echoes remain, light as a feather, gentle as a lullaby. If this story helped you rest, you can like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoyed our time together. And feel free to share in the comments where and when you're listening from. I always love hearing from fellow time travelers. Good night and sweet dreams from boring nap time. Welcome, sleepy traveler. Tonight, we arrive at the edge of an age. We've followed the jester across stone corridors and shadowy banquets, through mead-soaked festivals and quiet moments behind the curtain. But time, like a softly turning wheel, moves even through laughter. And now, the world of bells, riddles, and whispered truth is beginning to fade. This is not the end of the jester's spirit. No, only the slow lowering of the curtain. So dim your lamp, nestle in, and let's step gently into the final days of the court fool. The changing of the courts, it began not with thunder, but with stillness. There was a subtle change in the air across Europe in the late 1500s. Candles were taller, dresses stiffer, faces more solemn. In royal courts, there were fewer barks of unguarded laughter and more calculated smiles, folded hands, and carefully chosen words. Renaissance thinking, once bright with curiosity, was now coupled with an obsession for order, elegance, and control. Monarchs began to care more about image than charm, and jesters, with their crude jokes, colorful garb, and habit of poking royal egos, no longer quite fit the picture. Their silliness, once beloved, had become inconvenient. Where once they danced near thrones, now they were politely nudged to the side. The jester who stayed too long, one of the last of his kind, was a man known simply as Willikins, who served at the court of Queen Elizabeth. Willikins was a jester of the old style, patchwork, coat, bells on his shoes, a voice that could cut glass or charm a puppy. He had grown up in the court, performing tricks as a boy, learning quickly which noble liked riddles and which one didn't like to be laughed at while drunk. But times were changing, and Willikins was not. One evening, During a particularly grand feast, he made a jest about the queen's reluctance to marry. A clever rhyme involving suitors turned to statues and a cold wind blowing through the bridal chamber. The hall went still, no laughter, only the clink of a goblet being slowly set down. Willikins was not punished, not publicly. He was merely not invited back. The next morning, his chamber was empty. His bells were gone. From palaces to playhouses, as the royal courts cooled to the jester's presence, another stage began to rise. The public theater. In England, men like William Shakespeare were reinventing performance. The jester found new life in characters like the wise fool in King Lear or the witty Fest in Twelfth Night. These characters were playful, yes, but also haunting. They laughed, but their laughter had sorrow beneath it. Feste sings of time and endings, of winter and silence. Present mirth hath present laughter. What's to come is still unsure. Here, in these new plays, the jester did not vanish. He transformed, became poetry, shadow, and soul. The jester's quiet. Fade not all jesters found a place in this new world. Many disappeared into countryside inns, trading their courtly hats for simple caps. They became village entertainers, cart pullers, occasional fiddlers. Their tails grew long and fuzzy at the edges, and no one quite remembered who had once called them master of jest or beloved fool. Some wandered Europe's roads, joining traveling companies. Others became street prophets, muttering wisdom dressed as nonsense. One or two took to writing ballads, strange, funny, aching things that no one knew how to sing quite right. And some simply vanished, like mist when the sun rises. The fool's wisdom, but even as their voices faded from the echoing halls, the wisdom of the jester remained. It was tucked away in lullabies, tucked into nursery rhymes and bedtime riddles. There was a jester, painted in red, who danced while the world lay heavy with dread. In a world filled with war and judgment, jesters had once offered a different kind of courage, the kind that dares to laugh in the face of pomp, that refuses to kneel except in jest. They had reminded kings they were mortal, reminded generals that war was often folly, reminded queens that their sorrow, too, was human, that bravery wasn't always loud. Sometimes it had bells on, where laughter lives, and still, the jester remains. Not always visible, but always near. You can find him in the child who asks too many questions, in the comic who makes you laugh and then think, in the friend who tells you the truth, but with a smile. You can hear him in the unexpected chuckle at a serious meeting, in the moment someone dares to speak when everyone else stays silent, in the feeling that laughter, even soft and small, is a kind of rebellion, because that is the jester's legacy, not performance, but permission to laugh, to question, to wonder, to feel. The sleepy lantern. So, dear dreamer, as we near the end of this long, candle-lit tale, let us remember what the jester gave us. He gave us permission to be human, to be silly, to be wrong, to try again, to say, I don't know, and then burst into song anyway. He gave us riddles, not to confuse us, but to make us look twice, He gave us jokes, not to mock us, but to remind us we're not alone. And he gave us stories, odd little tales, full of dancing donkeys, singing goats, and kings who needed to laugh more often. These were not just distractions, they were lanterns in the dark, and we carry them still. A pause before the end, so here we pause. The jester has not quite left the stage, but he's at the edge now, half in shadow, half in moonlight. His last bell hasn't rung yet. Not quite. But it will. In the next and final part of this journey, we'll walk with him just a little farther, past the echo of applause, through the closing gates, and into a world where the jester finally finds his rest, not forgotten, only quieter, like laughter in a dream. All the world's a stage, wrote the bard, but some roles end with no applause, just the quiet hush of candle wax cooling, and a smile left behind like a trace of dawn. Welcome back, quiet traveler. Let's walk one final time beside our old companion, the jester, the fool, the whisperer in the shadow of thrones. His tale has taken us from feast to frost, through laughter and danger, mischief and meaning. And now, in this final chapter, the stage grows still, the fire is low, the castle is asleep, and outside, a light snow has begun to fall. Let's sit with the jester in the silence of his last evening and listen. The final feast. No one attended. There's no grand farewell for the fool, no golden goblet raised in his name, no trumpets to honor his years of laughter. He slips away like a servant dismissed early, like the last guest to leave a party that went too late. We imagine him, one of many, walking down the long corridor of memory, his bells muffled in the hem of his coat. In truth, we don't know the names of many who wore the cap and motley in those closing years. Historians rarely recorded the lives of jesters once they left court. They became whispers, worn smooth by time, but somewhere, perhaps in a modest cottage near the woods, or a quiet room above a village inn, one sat alone one evening with a cup of thin wine, watching the moon rise through frost-bitten glass, and, perhaps, for the first time in decades, he said nothing at all. The weight, behind the laughter. Being a jester was never just about comedy. It was a role carved from paradox, permission to speak truth, wrapped in a joke. It was armor made of laughter. It was rebellion dressed in ribbons. But behind that mask of merriment, there lived a soul worn thin. Imagine what it was to always smile, even when your heart was heavy, to be everyone's relief, but no one's equal, to make a room laugh and leave it quietly, alone. We don't often think of the jester's grief, but it was there, in the long walk home, after the banquet, in the joke that fell flat, in the moment he looked into the eyes of a grieving king and said what no one else dared, and then bowed as if it were all a game. In his last days, the jester did not juggle. He did not sing. He sat and thought, and perhaps, for once, let the silence speak. Where do jesters go? Some took up new roles, not in castles, but in the cracks between things. One opened a humble puppet theater. Another told fortunes under a tree by the roadside. One became a teacher in a village no one bothered to name, where he taught children riddles to help them remember their sums. Their days were simpler, their voices softer, and yet Something sparkled in their gaze still, the flicker of the fool's fire, because once you've danced in motley under royal chandeliers, once you've made a queen weep with laughter, once you've turned fear into giggles and shame into a song, you carry that magic always. Even if your shoes have no bells, even if no one remembers your name, the jester in the mirror. Close your eyes. Now picture yourself standing in front of a mirror. Not a grand mirror, but a small, cracked one. Maybe it hangs crookedly in a hallway. Maybe it's the kind you pass every day and hardly notice. In the reflection, you see yourself, but something's different. There, just behind your eyes, there's a wink. On your lips, a smirk. Around your shoulders, the faint shimmer of a motley coat. Faded, but not gone. That's the jester in you, still alive, because we all carry a bit of that spirit, don't we? That tender defiance, that willingness to laugh at life's absurdities, that strange courage to speak gently in a world that shouts. The jester didn't die. He stepped into us, into artists, dreamers, poets, into children who ask questions grown-ups can't answer, into the person who comforts a friend with a joke, even when the world is heavy. You, yes, you. In the footsteps of fools across history, the jester has walked beside kings and beggars alike. Beggars alike. He has seen battles planned and weddings stumble. He has tasted the first mead of spring and the last bread of famine. And through it all, he danced. Sometimes badly, sometimes beautifully, always bravely. He reminded us that to be foolish is not to be without wisdom, but to know that seriousness is not the same as truth, that sometimes the deepest truths wear bells and smile crookedly. So let us walk in his footsteps, not in costume, but in spirit. Let us remember to laugh when we're afraid, to speak honestly, but kindly, to sit quietly with someone who is sad, to poke holes in arrogance with feather-light jokes, and to leave every room just a little lighter than it was before. The last bell, and so it comes, not a loud toll, but a single, soft ring, somewhere in a memory not quite real. The jester bows one last time, not for applause, but for the joy of having performed. He leaves behind no monument, no tombstone of polished marble, just stories, just laughter tucked into dusty corners, just the sound of a bell on a night when you swear you were alone. And maybe you were, and maybe you weren't. A bedtime blessing from the fool tonight. As you drift into sleep, hear these final words from the jester, not shouted from a stage, but whispered beside your pillow. Laugh, even when you're tired. Be kind, even when they don't deserve it. Dance, even if no music plays. And never forget, truth can be silly, and love, foolish. And that's what makes it real. Let the bells fade gently into the distance. Let your breath slow. The curtain is drawn. The hall is empty. The moonlight is soft. And the jester, at last, has gone home. Some stories do not end. They whisper through worn shoes, closed books, and dust in beams of morning light. The jester is gone. But listen closely. You'll hear the bells still. Welcome back, gentle dreamer. Tonight, we walk not through grand castles or crowded feasting halls, but through the empty corridors they left behind. The torches are out. The laughter has faded. The goblets are long dry. And still, if you breathe slowly enough and let your heart quiet like fresh fallen snow, you may just hear the jester's echo in the dust. Let's take that slow, curious path together. One step, then another, soft as candle smoke, light as memory. This is a story of what lingers after the laughter ends. Forgotten corners, remembered faces somewhere. In an old manor in Gloucestershire, a servant once opened a locked chest. Inside, beneath a folded tapestry and a box of broken quills, they found a pair of worn leather shoes. The soles had been patched many times. The toes were scuffed, the stitching a little uneven, but what caught their breath was the faint glint of a tiny rusted bell, still sewn near the heel. No one remembered who had worn them. The estate had changed hands many times, but the shoes remained, tucked away like a secret, too delicate to throw out. And that, dear listener, is how stories remain, not in headlines, but in objects, in echoes, in dust. Somewhere else, a little girl in a village once found an old rhyme her grandmother used to sing, a nonsense song about a man with socks full of marzipan who made the bishop blush. No one knew where the song came from, but it always made the children giggle. The jester's voice, still playing, painted margins and scribbled smirks. Even in books, they hid medieval manuscripts. Those beautiful, hand-copied treasures were often surrounded by marginalia, little drawings and flourishes in the margins. Some were religious, some decorative, but every now and then a strange little face would grin up from the edge of a page. A figure mooning a bishop, a cat playing a lute, a monkey in a jester's cap juggling fish. Who drew them? Why, we can't know for sure. But many scholars believe scribes, tired from hours of careful, holy copying, let the spirit of the fool slip in, a secret joke for themselves, a wink across centuries. Even in places of solemnity, the jester found a way to dance. The fool who spoke after death. There's a tale, unconfirmed, but beloved, of a court jester named Mother Fool who served a minor baron in the Welsh marches. She was said to be sharp-tongued, bright-eyed, and carried a hand mirror she used to reflect light into people's eyes when they lied. When she died, her epitaph was supposedly etched by a local monk who admired her. Courage, it read. Here lies none wiser. Though she wore bells, she made tyrants blink, and peasants believe they mattered. No crown could command her heart, and no truth feared her voice. The stone was eventually lost in a flood, but the words someone copied, and they spread into sermons, into tavern songs, into plays. Her name faded, but her truth traveled. The fool as warning as kingdoms changed, and jesters fell out of fashion. Their memory remained, in whispers, in allegory, in warning. Parents told their children, don't speak like a fool, without knowing what kind of courage that once meant. Scholars wrote of the licensed madman, often misunderstanding what it cost to wear motley and stand alone before a court. But in certain quiet corners, especially among traveling performers, fools were remembered not as clowns, but as protectors of joy, of satire, of uncomfortable truths. And sometimes, when a new ruler rose too high or too cruel, a poet might say, "We could use a fool again." Little bells in strange places, in a sunlit farmhouse, near a winding French river, a child once found a carved wooden mask in the barn rafters, painted in red and gold, with tiny bells on its brow. They asked their grandmother what it was. She said, "That belonged to my mother's grandfather. He used to make people laugh so they wouldn't cry." In a monastery in Italy, a curious novice flipped to the back of a forgotten book of sermons and found, scribbled in a faint hand, even the "devil laughs when angels forget their lines." Fool's Note 14 to 23, and in a shop window in Prague, a faded tapestry hangs, woven in soft greens and purples. It shows a man juggling the moon, a harp, a crown, and a loaf of bread. No one can tell if he's winning or dropping them all, but he's smiling. The Jester's trail. So where did the Jesters truly go? Some believe they faded into folklore, became trickster spirits, Puck, Loki, till Eulenspiegel, Anansi, Coyote, characters who could laugh in the face of thunder and sneak wisdom into nonsense. Others say their spirit was reborn in street performers, political cartoonists, clowns, comedians, protest puppets, circus acts, and children's shows. And some say they never left at all. They just stopped wearing bells. They started carrying pens, microphones, guitars, memes. But deep down, it's the same soul. The one who refuses to take power too seriously, who says what no one else dares, who makes us laugh and think and feel all at once. The Jester walks among us still. The dust remembers if you ever find yourself in an old building, a library, a cathedral, a country inn, and you notice a little carving high above the doorframe that seems oddly joyful, or a pattern in the tiles that looks like a wink, or hear laughter where there should only be wind. It might be the dust remembering, because though Jesters were swept away by time, they left their footprints behind. Soft ones, curved like smiles. And all you need to find them is to slow down, be still, and listen. Not all Jesters wore motley, nor rang bells from their hats. Some juggled silence and sadness. Some told their jokes with bread and kindness. And some simply lived where no one thought laughter could grow. Welcome, traveler. Tonight's story takes us down a gentler road. No trumpets, no royal halls, no velvet seats for nobles. Tonight we follow a different kind of fool, the ones history never wrote about, the ones with no titles, no painted portraits, the ones who lived behind kitchens, behind convents, behind battle lines, spreading laughter not as a performance, but as a kind of quiet magic, so dim your lights lie back and close your eyes if you wish. Let your breath slow like candle wax. The bells have quieted. The audience is gone. But the Jester, dear listener, is still here. Let's follow the path they walked, off stage, out of sight, and deep into the hidden heart of things. A fool in the fields in a tiny village in northern Saxony. During the late 14th century, there lived a man called Elt. He was not a jester, not officially. He kept goats. He mended shoes. He sometimes helped the monks haul water in exchange for bread. But the villagers called him Goat Fool with affection, because every feast day, every rainstorm, every time the village gathered to thresh or plant or mourn or celebrate, Elt would do something odd. He would tie tiny shoes onto his goat's feet and have them perform. He would pretend to be a lost bishop looking for his hat in the mud. He'd sing songs about cabbages falling in love with church bells, and people would laugh, even when they were tired, even when the harvest was poor, even when death visited a little too often. Elt never asked for coin. He never bowed, but he made things lighter. That's what fools do. The silent fool, further south, in a monastery near Avignon, lived a mute named Brother Simon. He was not a monk, just a boy left at the door as a child. He never learned to speak, but he swept the halls, helped in the garden, and carved wooden spoons in his spare time. One year, during Lent, the monks discovered a series of tiny carvings tucked under the choir benches. Figures with huge noses, tiny halos, clumsy wings. One was a bishop upside down in a fish barrel. Another showed a pig reading scripture. At first, the monks were appalled. Then, they laughed quietly, guiltily. But they laughed. Brother Simon never claimed credit. But when he passed away, they found under his cot a small box full of drawings, puppets, and carved figurines, each one absurd, each one tender. They buried him with a simple stone. It read simply, "He showed us joy without a word." Jesters in the kitchen, not all performance comes with an audience. In the kitchens of castles, places full of heat, shouts, steam, and hurry, there often lived women and boys who kept morale alive in subtler ways. Take Marga, a cook's assistant in a crumbling keep near the Scottish border. She was no court fool. She stirred stews, peeled root vegetables, fed the hunting dogs. But whenever tempers flared, or the larder was bare, or a knight threw his cup in a fit, Marga would sing a nonsense song so ridiculous that even the surliest steward would snort. She'd imitate the lord's haughty walk with a ladle as a scepter. She'd hold courts with the chickens behind the smokehouse. She once baked a pie shaped like the castle and presented it with a scroll reading, "For your crumbling walls, my lord, I offer crumbling crust." They didn't sack her. They asked her to make 2 pies next time. Sometimes, laughter keeps the roof from falling. Fools of the battlefield, even in war, jesters found a place, not always in motley, but in spirit. There's a tale from the 100 Years' War of a man known only as le sourire, the smile. He was a baggage handler, not a soldier. He sang songs while lifting heavy crates. He mimicked the officers when they weren't looking. He made mud sculptures of kings and placed them around the campfires at night. Once, during a siege, he snuck out dressed as a bishop's donkey and returned with 3 chickens, claiming divine blessing. He was arrested, then praised, and then, strangely, left alone, because his laughter held something rare. Hope, and hope is armor too. The midwife's riddle. In the colder corners of Denmark, a traveling midwife named Ragnhild was known not just for delivering babies, but for calming frightened mothers with stories and riddles. One such tale went like this. A queen gave birth to a cabbage that sang. The cabbage fell in love with the sun, but wilted in sorrow. The royal gardener wept for 7 years. What was the baby's name? The mother's, between pains, would laugh. Some even shouted silly guesses mid-contraction. It didn't matter that there was no answer. What mattered was the breath between pain and joy. The jester walked even in the delivery room, cloaked in prayer in some convents, especially those tucked away in the Alps. There were nuns known for their feast day foolishness. Once a year, on the Feast of the Ass, roles were reversed. The lowliest nun became abbess. Sermons were sung backwards, and the chapel filled with animal brays and laughter. Most saw it as ritual release, but to some of the sisters, it was something more sacred. One anonymous nun wrote in the margins of her psalter, "Laughter is the bell that rings where fear is thick. It cracks the air open, and God listens differently." Perhaps that was her way of being a jester, without a stage or an audience. Just joy, whispered between prayers. The tavern keeper's truth. In Prague, there once lived a man named Joseph, who ran a crooked little tavern where the beams were too low and the beer too warm. But Joseph had a gift. He could listen. He could nod at just the right moment. And when someone was too proud or too cruel or too loud, he would interrupt with a story that made them rethink everything, like the one about the king who traded places with his cook and was never recognized again, or the knight who tried to slay a mirror, or the rooster who sued the moon for stealing his shine. No one ever knew whether Joseph believed these stories, but they left his tavern softer, kinder, lighter. Sometimes the jester is just the one who reminds you to be human. The disappearing fool. Some say there was once a woman who traveled from village to village with no name, no shoes, and a hat that looked like a folded map. She told fortunes using buttons. She cured hiccups by singing to them. She taught children how to catch clouds using spoons. And then she'd disappear. No one ever saw her arrive. No one ever saw her leave. But villages remembered her long after, not because of the magic, but because she made them feel like the world still had some. Why they hid, you may ask. Why were these jesters hidden? Why didn't they stand on stages, or wear jingle caps, or earn titles? Maybe because life didn't give them the chance. Maybe because the court was too far, or the audience too cruel, or the role already taken. But maybe also because their kind of fooling didn't need spotlight. It worked best in shadows, in kitchens, in fields, in quiet places where joy grows slow and deep. They didn't perform to be seen. They performed because something inside them glowed warm when others smiled. And that, dear dreamer, is the oldest magic of all, the hidden line. If you draw a line from every hidden jester we've mentioned tonight, from Elt, the goatman, to Simon, the silent carver, from Marga, the cook, to Ragnhild, the riddle midwife, you begin to see a secret map, a map of kindness, of cleverness, of rebellion wrapped in a smile. It weaves across Europe and beyond, across time, across generations, and sometimes, if you trace it with your heart, you'll find that it runs right through you too. When the motley fades and the bells fall silent, the fool's laughter lingers like a soft breeze, a gentle reminder that even in shadow, The light of joy never truly dies. Welcome back, traveler. Tonight, our tale nears its gentle end, but the journey of the jester, like a river under quiet stones, flows on. For the jester was never just a person in a hat with bells. She was a spirit, a whisper, a twinkle in the corner of the eye. And though courts have long since fallen silent, the legacy of the fool has threaded its way into the very fabric of our lives. So, let's take a slow, soft walk together through time, following that legacy, listening for the laughter that still ripples beneath the surface, the last fool in the court, in the fading light of the Renaissance. The grand castles and royal courts of Europe began to change their tune. No longer did kings and queens lean so heavily on jesters to brighten their days. Musicians played sweet melodies, poets spun long tales, and actors graced the stages with stories. The jester's role shifted and grew smaller, like a candle flickering at the edge of a vast room. Among the last of these ancient fools was Archibald Armstrong, who served King James I of England. Archibald was a clever man, quick with a joke and sharp with his wit. He knew the power of laughter to lighten heavy moods, but he also knew the dangers of speaking truth in a court full of sharp tongues and sharper knives. Archibald's pranks were legendary, from swapping the king's shoes with wooden clogs to dressing up as a wise man and confounding the nobles with riddles and nonsense. But as the years passed, even Archibald felt the air change around him. The court's laughter grew quieter. The king's smile became less frequent, and the political games played behind closed doors left less room for folly. Yet Archibald understood something that no courtier could see clearly. The fool's true strength was not in applause or favor, but in the courage to speak truth wrapped in laughter. So, when his time at court ended, Archibald did not vanish. He slipped away quietly, blending back into the towns and villages from which he came, teaching children how to find joy in the small things: a funny face, a silly song, a secret joke shared beneath the stars. Though history forgets his name, the spirit of Archibald lives on, in every laugh that breaks the silence, in every smile that dares to bloom in dark times. The jester lives in every heart. Perhaps the most magical thing about the jester is this: she never really left us. She lives on, tucked inside the quiet corners of our hearts, waiting to dance out when we need her most. Imagine a child quietly giggling over a silly rhyme whispered in the dark, a friend sharing a joke to lighten a heavy mood, a stranger smiling at a clumsy mistake, turning it into a moment of shared laughter. These moments are echoes of the jester's timeless song. She is the gentle rebellion against despair, the soft resistance to sorrow. She is the spark that lights a candle when the night feels too long. Every whispered joke, in every playful gesture, the fool's heart beats strong. And so, though the grand stages have dimmed and the motley has faded, the jester's spirit remains vibrant and alive, a gift passed down through time, the legacy of the fool passed from lips to ears, from one generation to the next, sometimes loudly, sometimes in hushed whispers. Traveling minstrels carried jester stories across lands and seas, weaving humor into their songs and tales. Street performers mocked kings and priests alike, risking scowls and worse to keep laughter alive. Carnival fools danced in the streets each spring, reminding people that even the heaviest lives could be lightened by joy. And in the quiet of libraries and theaters, the fool lived again in the pages of plays and poems, challenging authority with a wink and a nod. Even today, comedians and storytellers follow in the jester's footsteps, using humor to connect us, to heal us, to make us think. Each smile they inspire, each chuckle they draw, is a thread in the tapestry the jester began weaving so long ago. The fool's secret power. The fool's power was never just in laughter itself, but in what laughter can do. Laughter cracks open the armor of pride. It breaks the silence of fear. It softens anger and melts away the sharp edges of pain. It is a kind of magic, quiet but unstoppable. When a jester makes a king laugh, he is not just entertaining, he is reminding the king he is human, with faults and fears, just like everyone else. When a fool mocks a cruel law, she is speaking truth where others cannot. And when a child laughs, despite hardship, it is a tiny victory of joy over sorrow. That power is the legacy that lives on in every moment when we choose to smile, to joke, to lighten our hearts and those around us. The quiet blessing of the jester. So as you prepare to close your eyes tonight, let the jester's quiet blessing fall softly upon you. May you find the courage to laugh at life's oddities and difficulties. May you carry kindness in your heart, sharing joy even when shadows gather. May you hold your own foolishness gently, knowing it is a part of your strength. And may you rest in the peace that comes when you realize laughter is always nearby, like a warm friend waiting just around the corner. The jester's legacy is not locked in history books or faded paintings. It lives in you, in me, in all who dare to smile in the dark. Good night, dear traveler. If this story brought you warmth, you may like and subscribe, only if it feels right to you. And please, tell me in the comments where you are, what time it is, and if you have a jester hidden in your heart. From boring nap time, with quiet joy and soft smiles. Sleep well,